Hello and welcome back to Politically Incorrect. I'm Tom Christiano. Well, tonight we have a very special program. We have the two state Senate candidates on for the 3rd Middlesex District. I think it's the Middlesex, right, Sandy? And for the first 30 minutes, we have the Republican candidate who won in the recent primary, Sandi Martinez. She's going to be with us for the first 30 minutes. And the final 30 minutes of the show will be the Democratic candidate, Mike Barrett, who won in his primary with 5 candidates running. So we're going to start tonight with the Republican candidate, Sandi Martinez. Welcome to the show, Sandy.
Thanks, Tom.
And maybe if we could start with just giving a little background, your background and why you decided to run again for state Senate this year.
Well, shortly after the last race, people began approaching me and asked me if I was going to consider running again, and I had to give it some serious thought. Yeah. It takes a lot of work and it's a lot of money. Yeah. But enough people encouraged me to do so, and so that's why I'm running again. I think the work and the issues that we began working on in the last race are still issues today. Yes. The economy is worse, unemployment is worse, and so we decided to run again. Back to who I am, I grew up in Chelmsford. My mother moved here when I was 5 years old after my dad was killed in a fighter plane accident out in Arizona. He was getting ready to go over to Korea. She was pregnant with her 4th child. I was 3.5. So she bought a house in Chelmsford. We grew up here. I went to Chelmsford High School. Eventually, I became an IT professional, worked for IBM, got involved with lots of things like problem solving. And I look at running for the Senate as a big problem to solve. I think there are an awful lot of issues that we face today here in Massachusetts. And with my IT skills and my debugging skills, I look at everything as a problem to solve. And so I hope to bring my IT skills, my parenting skills, all those different things that we experience in life to bear as a state senator.
I see, great, thank you. Well, you had a tough primary this year with Greg Howes, who I believe is a member of the Board of Selectmen in Concord, and you defeated him in the primary. Could you reflect a little bit as to why do you think you won that race and how the race went itself?
Well, I think, number one, I've done this before and I have pretty good name recognition, but I think more than that is people like my message. I am a fiscal conservative, a social conservative. People look at the things that I bring to the table that are so different from what's currently on Beacon Hill. Right now, Republicans are only 10%. 10% of 200 people down there.
Of the entire, that's the House and the Senate,
the House
right?
and the Senate. There are only right now, 4 Republican senators and no woman Republican senator.
No woman?
No.
How many males Republican senators?
4.
Just 4, I see.
Yep, there's only 4. And in the House, the problem's not as bad. There are 37, I believe, state reps that are Republicans out of 160.
I see, yeah.
And so I think people are looking for change. They're tired of the same old, and so they want something new and fresh and different.
Yes, yeah. Well, we have had Republican governors quite a bit in the last few 30 years or whatever. Maybe
it's
half
been
of
a long time, though, since they've had enough to get a veto.
Oh, I see. Enough
of their own Republicans in the House and Senate to sustain a veto.
I see, yes, yeah. Well, as you mentioned, one of the biggest problems we have in the state is jobs and the economy. What ideas do you have to help get more jobs, to help the public sector, help the private sector create an atmosphere to create more jobs here in Massachusetts?
Well, I don't think it's the public sector's job to create, the public sector's mission is not to create jobs.
No, I said the environment.
You're right, it's to create the environment, and to do so I think we need to lower taxes. We need to reduce the regulations that are strangling our businesses, especially the small business owners. I've seen so many close shop and flee the state in the last cycle because they just can't afford to do business here in Massachusetts anymore. And we also need to change the health care. It's too expensive for the citizens in general, but it's even more expensive for the small business owner. When I was door knocking in several of the different towns, and I would go in and I would ask the business owners, what is the most important thing that you think is hurting your business today, and what would you like your next state senator to do? Almost, I would say a good 50% of them said we need help, we need relief. And a lot of them reflected the fact that they couldn't even grow their own business because they can't afford to hire new people, because then they would have to, insure them, and they can't afford to.
What does it cost now them to insure somebody with health insurance,
It's
for
more
example?
expensive than you and I could probably even imagine. a homeowner today is paying between $1,800 and $2,600 depending on the size of their family, and the businesses are paying even more. It's more than they can afford.
Yeah, but they pay a portion of that, right? That is, they don't pay a full 100%, do they, of every employee? Doesn't the employee kick in a certain percentage?
I haven't asked, and I haven't polled
yeah.
individual businesses which plans they've signed on to and how they're paying. All I know is they're saying we can't afford it.
Yeah. Is there a certain point at which that policy kicks in? That is, do they have to have more than 10 employees before they have to have health insurance for them?
10 or more,
So
I believe.
10 or more, something like that?
And I had one businesswoman say to me, not only could she not afford to hire any, she was going to have to let some people go. And in the process of letting people go, she would have less people to help her grow her business and do what she needs to do, so it was really hurting her financially.
She had to let some people go because
she couldn't afford the insurance.
Yeah, well, that's too bad, huh?
Of course it is.
I mean, but it's good to insure people, though, right? So how do you think we could solve that problem? Or you may not have that answer. That is, how could we help provide health insurance to the citizens of our state?
I think the way that we were doing it before works best. We need to innovate. We need to allow, for instance, competition amongst the insurance companies. Allow people to buy insurance over state lines, like with car insurance. Also, we need to have some tort reform and stop all these malpractice suits. There's a lot of things that we can do, and we've talked about that in some of our press releases.
Yes. I bet you a lot of those malpractice suits, if they run into millions of dollars, the jury awards millions of dollars, that goes into the healthcare premiums, right? It raises it for everyone, doesn't it? If you have these million-dollar judgments. So that's what you mean by tort reform, right?
I'm talking about we need to get the lawyers out of the business. And we need to be sure that people can afford to buy their own health insurance. Competition is always a good thing, and right now there's no competition in Massachusetts.
But what do you mean by tort reform? You're talking about getting the lawyers out. What do you mean by that, Sandy?
Tort reform.
Okay, yeah. Could you define? But isn't that you want it so they don't pay judgments that are so high? Isn't that what you're talking about?
I think you should have limits on what they can request.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Because a lot of times they could run into millions of dollars, and a lot of people don't like that too much. If they feel it's undeserved, and that goes into everybody's premiums.
That's not even the number one issue that's going on out there right now. Health insurance is only one of the problems. Right now, we have a 50% unemployment rate amongst college students coming out of college with degrees. They can't find jobs.
50%?
50% amongst college students across the nation.
Oh, across the nation.
It's a national figure. But above and beyond that, even high school kids can't find jobs. There aren't people are leaving Massachusetts. Businesses are fleeing to New Hampshire. They're fleeing to Texas. They're fleeing down to North and South Carolina. Any place where they can do business and grow and thrive.
Yes.
And it's hurting Massachusetts residents because they can't find work.
Yeah. But as you know, Sandy, we have an unemployment rate which is below the national average, right? I believe Massachusetts is more like 6.3.
It just went up to 6.3 again.
Yeah, that's right.
It is,
and
below it is below the national average, but it's still too high, and it also does not take into account people that have stopped looking for work and people that are underemployed, people that have taken jobs just to buy groceries.
Oh, yes.
We've got one of the highest underemployed rates in the nation.
Yes.
If you go to new jobs from Massachusetts, they've got all the statistics there. I haven't memorized them, but it's an incredibly high number.
Yes, thanks. Well, I think you're also, I'm sure you're very also interested in the income tax rates here in Massachusetts. What do you think about the current state income tax rate? Do you think it's too high? Do you think it should be lower? Do you think it should be higher?
I think the people have spoken. It was voted on many, many years ago that the state income tax should be lowered to 5%.
Yes.
And that's what I advocate.
Yes.
The people spoke, and that's what it should be.
Yes.
I mean, right now, it's, again, 6 point whatever it is. The sales tax is killing people, too.
Right.
That should also go back to 5%.
Back to 5, yes. I was going to ask you about that, too, later. I think some of the Democratic candidates, when they were on my show at the debate for state senate, recommended a progressive income tax rate here in Massachusetts. What do you think about that?
I think it's a horrible idea.
Okay, could you say why?
Our taxes are high enough already. Massachusetts is one of the most expensive states in the nation to live in. And I think that going to a progressive income tax doesn't help anybody. I'm a no new tax person. I've taken the no new tax pledge, and obviously I would fight against any increase on any tax in Massachusetts.
I say any, yes. So did you sign that with Grover Norquist? I know he was on your show a few years ago, right?
Well, it's the Americans for Tax Reform, which is his organization, but
Yeah.
the one that I signed was signed here in Massachusetts
Yeah.
at Citizens for Limited Taxation.
Yeah.
But it's a national tax pledge.
So it says, Sandy, that you would not raise taxes under any circumstances in
Right.
Massachusetts. No increase in sales tax, no increase in the income tax.
Right.
How about the capital gains tax, dividends tax rates?
I will not
None of that.
vote to increase any tax.
Any tax is great. And the sales tax, you mentioned it a little bit before. It's currently what, about 6.25% or something like that?
6.25%.
So you'd like to get that back down
to
to
5%,
which it had been. Why do you think it stayed at 6.25? It's been a few years now. It's been 6.25, right? Right.
The legislature doesn't have the will to roll it back. Right now, we have a Democratic-controlled legislature. The Republicans have been fighting and trying to get the taxes lowered and get the taxes repealed and rolled back and all of those kinds of things, but the Democrats stop it at every turn. The people have asked for it, and I think the people deserve it. They
Yes.
deserve relief.
Yes. What do you think would happen if the sales tax was lower? Do you think we'd have more economic activity here in the state?
I really don't know what the numbers are on the number of people, especially here on the border, who go to New Hampshire.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're losing an awful lot of revenue to New Hampshire because people just don't want to pay the 6.25, and they go up there, they pay nothing.
Yes.
And businesses along the border are suffering.
Yes.
I've talked to people in Dracut, I've talked to people all along the border when I'm visiting those towns, and they're all being hurt very much by that increase in sales tax. They've lost an awful lot of customers, and I think, yes, lowering it will bring some business back.
Yes, yeah. Well, just because supply and demand, right? If you lower the price of something, the sales tend to increase for
Right.
that.
Which
the
brings in
demand
more
is high,
revenue.
Yes, that's kind of the idea of supply-side economics, I believe. You know, lower the tax rates, you'll increase sales and thereby increase revenues overall, right? Isn't that the philosophy of the supply-side economics?
If you say so.
Okay, right. Well, another.
I'm not an economist.
Okay, yeah. Well, I read about that all the time.
I know,
but,
and,
yeah.
and I believe that you have to have sound fiscal policy,
Yeah.
common sense reforms,
Yeah.
common sense policies, simple things that people can understand. I would love to see us, go back to a one-page form that you fill out your income tax on. That probably won't ever happen in my lifetime, but
Yeah, right.
I think it makes sense.
Yes, yeah. Well, I guess things are so complicated now in our world these days. It's hard to get anything down to one page, I guess.
I guess. Well, it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. Well, one of the controversial welfare kind of issues in the state lately had to do with EBT cards. And I don't know if you read the Boston Herald, but I read it online. And I remember there was a woman at a farmer's market who she made whoopie pies, but she didn't want to honor the EBT cards for whoopie pies, which are basically like big cakes, right?
Right.
That go for like, I heard, over $10 each. She just felt that the taxpayers' money should not be used for sweets like that. It should be used for healthy foods or whatever. So what are your thoughts about the controlling EBT cards in terms of not allowing it for sweets like that, or for lottery tickets, or for liquor, or for cigarettes, things like that? Do you think there should be restrictions on EBT cards?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole purpose of the EBT cards is to help people eat.
Yes.
And eating, I don't believe the government should be controlling the sugar in our drinks. They shouldn't be controlling the size of our drinks. They shouldn't be controlling what we buy as far as food items. So the whoopie pies, that falls in as a food item.
Okay.
Should somebody be able to use an EBT card at a farmer's market? I have not even heard of that one before.
Oh, yeah?
But I
Oh.
don't believe that you should be using them to give Fido a bath or a pedicure. I don't think you should be using it to buy jewelry. I don't think you should be using it to buy airplane tickets to go to Aruba and things like that. I think the whole purpose is to help those who are really fallen on hard times and they need help with food. In the old days, you used to go to your local town and you'd go in and you would get the basics, the staples in life.
Yes.
And I think somehow between that simple plan and this mess that we've created, we've introduced a level of the ability to commit huge fraud.
Yeah.
And I think Shauna O'Connell, the state representative who is from the Taunton area, who is a Republican, a freshman woman Republican, was one of the champions of the EBT card reform that just passed.
I see, yes.
And I support her and I applaud her efforts, and I would join with her in maybe tightening up the rules even more.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well, I'd like to ask you about a couple of the state ballot questions. They're going to be on the November ballot here in Massachusetts. There's 3 questions, but I'd just like to ask you about 2 of them, which I think are the most controversial or interesting for the people at home.
I think they're all controversial depending on who you are.
Yeah, right. The first one I'd like to ask you about is medical marijuana. Do you think we should pass a law that allows medical marijuana here in Massachusetts? No. Okay. So, any particular reasons, Andy, or?
I believe we've already lowered the penalties on possessing marijuana.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to go any further than that. I believe that we should allow physicians to determine what their patients need as far as providing the proper drugs for their patients. And I don't think passing this initiative is going to do anything to help the situation. I think it's just going to make matters worse in Massachusetts.
I see, yes.
Or anywhere it's implemented.
Anyway. Yeah, it might be. I think I read somewhere 30 states or something have it already in the country, which is quite a change from the 60s and 70s when none of them did.
Right.
But it's a big change in culture, I think, with that law. I guess it's basically sanctioned growing marijuana plants in different locations, so it's quite different. Well, another big important question on the ballot is the Death with Dignity ballot action proposal. What do you think about the Death with Dignity proposal? Are you in favor of that? Or?
I oppose that as well. And as a matter of fact, back to the other question, the Massachusetts Medical Association also opposes the marijuana issue on the ballot. Back to the Death with Dignity, I think there are too many cases that people are seeing where the fail-safes don't work. I don't believe that you need to allow physicians who have taken an oath to do no harm to kill their patients. I feel that, I have a brother who just died of cancer last year. And I know his wife is a critical care nurse. And we sat there the day he died. I was there. And he was on a very low dose of morphine. She could have easily, as a nurse, I suppose, given him a little bit more to help him along. But she chose not to. And he passed while we were there. He just took a very gentle breath and was gone. That was death with dignity. He died naturally, and it was hard to watch. But I don't believe giving physicians that ability is right for America. It's not right for Massachusetts. I've been studying this issue for a long time. I've opposed it. I've testified against it on Beacon Hill. There's a group of severely disabled people who live down on the Cape. And the name of their group is Not Dead Yet. They're paraplegics, quadriplegics, etc. When I was testifying at the State House, they came to testify against one of the last efforts to pass this. And they argued eloquently why their life was precious and why they don't need death with dignity, so to speak. And I applauded them for their courage for coming up to speak out against this. The other thing is there's a woman named Johnny Erickson Tata who was injured probably 40 years ago in a diving accident. She broke her neck. She is a quadriplegic. When she was first in the, not hospice, but wherever they care for you when you're severely injured, she wanted to die. She asked her friends to kill her. Had they had death with dignity, she wouldn't be alive today. She then eventually recovered from that. She got married. She now paints with a paintbrush in her teeth. And her works are sold all over the world. She speaks all over the world out, and she speaks out against euthanasia. And I think people like her who've lived it, who've been there, who've done that, know better than you or I do, or even a lot of the legislators. And so I just applaud her. She spoke in Boston. I went to hear her at the Heinz Auditorium. The place was packed. She gives good reason for life. So I strongly oppose that particular measure.
Thanks. How about Melissa's law, the new law we have here in Massachusetts? If there's 3 violent offenses, I guess someone is put away for life. What are your thoughts about Melissa's law?
I think it took too long to pass. I met the father. I met Melissa's father, Len Gosel. He spoke at a meeting in Waltham just, I want to say, within the last 6 months. And he still cries when he's telling the story about his
Yeah.
daughter. And had that man not been let out, he was a 3-time violent offender.
Yes.
He committed heinous acts on her, stripped her naked, stabbed her to death, and left her on a tree.
Jeez.
And as Len was telling his story, he just kept talking about, I've been trying to get this bill passed for 12 years. 12 years.
Wow.
And it finally passed. Our legislature finally did the right thing and passed it. I just wish it had been done sooner, and she might
Yes.
still be alive.
Yes, yeah. Well, thank you. Terrible tragedies occur here in Massachusetts as
Well,
well
they
as
occur
throughout the
everywhere.
country. Yeah, it's terrible.
They do.
I think there's a new push now to have, for daycare centers, union membership for the workers in these small mom and pop daycare centers, things like that. What are your thoughts about that, Sandy?
I oppose it.
Yeah.
We did a press release on it. I think it's very anti-woman.
Okay.
Forcing a home daycare provider to become a union member against her wishes, just because she's taking a state voucher for one of her children, perhaps. I think it's insanity. I wish I could read my press release, but that would take too long. It makes no sense at all. Why?
Yeah.
It's another big strong-arm attempt to take over private sector jobs, home daycare businesses, small business owners.
Yes.
Most of them only have like 5 or 6 children.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I believe, if I'm correct in this, I believe it's if you have 1 out of 10, but if you only have 6 kids and you have 1, then you're subject to that and you're automatically unionized.
To have one
The
what, Sandy?
one child who receives a state voucher.
Oh, who sees, okay. A
So
state
therefore you're
voucher.
automatically unionized. I mean, where does the government get off thinking it can just automatically go in and tell you you are now a union member?
I see. Yes, yeah, yeah.
It's overreach again by our government.
Well, another area where some say the government is overreaching is for deposits for water and juice bottles here in Massachusetts. What do you think about that, Sandy?
I was in Concord when they were debating that particular item for Concord. Concord passed it.
Yes.
And I
yeah.
believe the Attorney General has said, yes, this is true. So now you cannot buy bottled water in Concord in the regular, whatever they are, 8-ounce, 12-ounce
yeah,
containers.
yeah.
You can buy a half-gallon bottle.
Yeah.
You can buy a 1-gallon bottle, but you can't get the little ones. I think it's insanity. Once more, it's just another tax.
Yeah.
It's a tax, and I oppose taxes of any way, shape, or form. I mean,
Yeah.
but I mean increasing taxes, and that's
Increasing
just an
taxes.
increase in tax. I think it's
Yeah.
insanity.
Yes. Well, another area which many people feel we need reform here in Massachusetts is with the pension system. Wasn't there a case a few years ago where there was corruption in pension hiring? Some of the people controlling the pension, I think in the prisons, or prison reform too, I guess that too. But what do you think about pension reform basically here in Massachusetts and for state workers and that kind of thing?
Well, I think right now Massachusetts and many states are at a tipping point. Our pension plans for government employees, like state legislators and others, have gotten to the point where they're outpacing what you get in the private sector to do the same amount of work.
Yeah.
Personally, I would like to see every state take the model of Texas.
Yeah.
Texas is in session 4 months every 2 years. They get a stipend. New Hampshire just gets a stipend. There is no pension.
Yeah.
I don't think it's something that's a necessary thing. And
Yeah.
if there were ever a majority of people who would agree with that, I would love to see Massachusetts go back to a part-time legislature
Yes, yeah.
and with no pensions.
Yes.
When I ran last time, I took an oath that I would not receive a pension, and I would probably do the same thing again this time.
Yes. And I was also talking about pensions for like retired state police officers. Like, isn't Billy Bulger, I think he's getting over $300,000 a year for his pension. I think our state representative, one of them here in Chelmsford, Jim Arcero, has been working very hard to get the pension reform passed so that we won't pay over $100,000 a year to any former state worker. Do you know? Because
I
some
don't
of
know
them are
anything
getting
about
over
that.
$200,000
Yeah, I
a
know
year.
that a lot of them
Quite
are
a few.
crazy.
Yes,
It's
yeah.
insanity.
So my question to you, would you work to help reform that, like
Oh,
support Jim
absolutely.
Arcero and that, to lower the pensions and get them
I'd have
down?
to talk to Jim and see exactly what
Yeah.
he's proposing, but
Yeah.
it sounds,
yeah.
based on what you're saying, it sounds
just-
like a good idea.
Yeah, lower amounts. Thank you.
Did you know that we have 50 states, not whatever Obama said, 47 or 52 or whatever it was, 57. We have 50 states, and only 11 of them have full-time legislators. And out of those 11, 7 states are going bankrupt.
Wow.
And they're blaming most of it on the pension systems and all of the benefits and things like that that are just putting people over the tipping point. I
Wow.
found it an interesting statistic when I read that on the web.
Wow, yes, it is interesting. But I can't believe our time is just about run out, Sandy. How
Okay.
about a quick answers on a couple of these? How about your thoughts about gay marriage? We do have it in Massachusetts. Do you support that, or are you against it?
When they were passing it, I supported reciprocal benefits, which was first put forward in Hawaii, which would allow any two people who can't legally marry enter into a contract to get all the benefits that the gay community was asking for. So I supported reciprocal benefits.
I see, yes. How about requiring union contractors to work on all state-funded jobs? What do you think about that, Sandy? Requiring all state-funded jobs to have unionized workers.
Are you talking about repealing the Pacheco law?
Yes.
I would support repealing the Pacheco law.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Well, we only have a minute left, but a big race here in Massachusetts throughout the country is our U.S. Senate race with Scott Brown and Elizabeth Warren. What do you think about that?
What's to think about it?
Yeah.
I support Scott Brown.
Okay. Could you expand a little bit as to why? Why do you think he'd be a better senator for us, just quickly? Or would it be too?
Well, Elizabeth Warren is a progressive based on the things that she has advocated. I disagree with her position on almost everything. Scott Brown, I disagree with a lot of his positions, but I'm more in agreement with him than I am in disagreement.
Yes.
And I just think that we need balance in Washington like we need balance here in Massachusetts.
Yes, thank you. Well, for our final question, just to help you campaign a little bit, do you have any campaign parties coming up soon?
We do.
or-
We have an event with Howie Carr coming up in Waltham on October 6th. We have an
October
event.
6th, yeah.
Yep, it's going to be in Waltham. We have one with Mary Connaughton on October 10th.
Okay.
And a debate watching party at my headquarters on October 1st. We couldn't get tickets to the Songus Arena.
Oh.
15,000 people signed up for them.
Wow.
And we couldn't get any, so we decided we're going to have our own debate watching party at
And
my
your
headquarters
which is-
on October 1st.
And where is it located?
60 Chelmsford Street, above Highlight Salon.
Where's Highlight Salon?
Highlights, Giorgio's, Eyewear, and
Oh, okay, I know.
Color
Oh, I
Nails,
know what you mean,
right
yes.
next to the jewelry store and
Next to
across from
Church Jewel-
Feeney's.
Yeah, further down from Church Jewelers and everything.
No,
There's the eyewear store.
Right, it's a little plaza.
Yeah,
We're
a
on the
little
second floor.
Yes. Oh, great. Do you have a sign there? Because I didn't
Yeah, I
notice
do.
the
I got
sign.
banners
I gotta look up on the way
I got
home.
banners on 3 sides of
Oh,
the
good.
building.
I got to look up there when
You
I
gotta
go
look
through
up.
the center. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot for being on the show, Sandy. I hope
Thank
you
you for having
enjoyed
me.
it. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
And it's always great talking politics with you and with the Democratic candidate as well. So, Mike, as I started with Sandy, maybe if I could start with you, if you could talk a little bit about your background and why you decided to run for state senate this year.
Sure. I'm also in IT. Sandy's here in the studio, and we share that background in information technology. I'm in healthcare and information technology, so I focus on the uses of the internet and cell phones, primarily to keep patients well. There's a lot of activities around nurses and physicians' use of the internet, but I really focus on the question, how can a patient keep herself on a diet or compliant with her medications, or how can a guy make sure that he monitors his diabetes or his hypertension? There are lots of little gadgets and gizmos that we can use to stay healthy, and I have a business that focuses on innovation in that area.
You own that business, Mike?
I do.
Is that continuing while you're running for, how is it?
I've had to put it on effectively on hold.
I see,
The
yeah.
campaign, my primary, as you know, and was very, very spirited.
Yes. And speaking of that, why do you think you prevailed against, there was 4 other very
Terrific
well-qualified
candidates.
candidates,
Yeah.
and you came out on top, and why do you think that happened, Michael?
Well, let me tell you, and this is honestly the truth, I think the worst people to ask questions like that are the candidates themselves.
Oh.
The answers are always going to be are never going to be accurate. So I wind up asking observers of the race why they think the results are as they are. And I learn a lot myself. I don't have any grand theories. I do know that I worked very hard, but Alex Buck of Chelmsford was a terrific candidate, and he was working just as hard as I was. There were 2 candidates from Concord, so they split the Concord vote.
Yes.
That probably helped me a lot.
Yes.
And Joe Mullen of Weston, well, it's a small town.
Yeah.
And so the size of Weston may have helped me as well, but it's hard to know.
It's hard to know. We'll be having 1 week after the November election, a post-election analysis show. So we'll be talking all about that, all about not only these local elections, but also the presidential election, the U.S. Senate race, and the congressional race, and then the state Senate race.
Well, needless to say, reporters are good folks to ask those questions of. I just find that we candidates are always pretty self-serving in our answers. And I'm perfectly willing to be self-serving right now, but I would prefer to not speculate.
Well, it's always good to be self-serving, right? Especially if you go to a fast food restaurant, serve yourself, right? But, well, one of the most important issues right now is jobs and the economy here in the state of Massachusetts. What ideas do you have to have the state provide an environment so that the private sector can create more and better jobs here in Massachusetts?
Well, it does bear repeating that our unemployment rate is lower than that of other major industrial states and lower than the national average. And so the first focus, realistically, as a single legislator among 200 legislators, is to maintain stability, to make sure that state policy doesn't go wildly off in a liberal or a conservative direction. We have an equilibrium that's working. We are, relatively speaking, a low-tax state. We're below the 50-state average. So I want to be sure that the arch-conservatives who say that we should lower taxes further don't prevail. But I'm also not in favor of raising taxes remarkably, with one exception that I'd be happy to mention. The important thing is to collect enough tax revenues to balance the state budget honestly, without tricks. A lot of states have had to resort to trickery. We fulfill our state constitutional requirement of a balanced budget every year, something the federal government never manages to achieve. And we do it with some combination recently of spending cuts and decent taxes. I wouldn't disturb that equilibria by becoming a rabid tax cutter, and that's one area where Sandi Martinez and I honestly disagree.
Yes. For example, one of the areas that you disagree with is on the progressive income tax rate. When we had the debate here on this show with the Democratic candidates, you and all the other candidates mentioned that you would be in favor of a progressive income tax rate here in Massachusetts. Sandi, as you know, is very much against it, Sandi Martinez. So what are your thoughts about that?
I don't think there's any chance whatsoever of getting a progressive income tax. I ran for governor in 1994. As you know, I'm a former state senator. I've got experience in doing this job. It's been a long time. I raised my kids, who are now age 23, and stayed in the private sector for 18 years. But there was a time when I served in the state Senate representing Cambridge and Belmont, Watertown and Austin Brighton before my family and I moved to Lexington. And we had a progressive income tax on the ballot. It was the 5th time it had been on the ballot.
What year was this, Michael?
1994.
94. When
the
you ran for
voters
governor,
voted it down as they had the previous 4 times. When I talk to proponents of a progressive income tax who are still for it in principle, as am I, they do not want to put it on the ballot once again. They feel that the public has more or less spoken. So I agree with that. I am for a progressive income tax. I do not think it would pass statewide. So we have to look at other ways of making the tax system fairer and, I hope, more progressive. And by progressive, we mean that people in my income bracket pay more than somebody whose family income is $30,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. I happen to think that's a principle of fairness. I will mention that my dad is a Republican, and he's still alive. He's a businessman, had been, I should say, all his life. I remember him telling me when I was a little kid, it must have been the Eisenhower administration, explaining to me the justice of the progressive income tax on the federal level. He was a Republican, he emphasized, but he just felt, and maybe it came from our religious background, where I'm one of 10 kids, and we were all good Catholics, and it may have been that, but he always explained that he thought that it was fair to pay more if you made more, and to help those who were making a little less. So I've always been a believer in the progressive income tax, and there was a time when that was a bipartisan position that Republicans and Democrats agreed on.
And we still agree on a national level, as you said, right?
Well, I don't
have
know
it-
if we agree on it, because
We
that
have
is to say, I think
national
Republicans would
progressive
try to
income tax
rescind.
rates.
They're trying to rescind
Oh.
the progressivity of the federal income tax too. They
Some-
really
some-
do favor
Yeah.
reduced taxes on the wealthiest 1%.
Yeah.
I do believe, in contrary, I do believe that a progressive income tax is fair and is a good, sensible way to make sure that we all make money and keep money, but contribute something to the commonwealth, the common
Yes.
interest too.
Yes. Well, another way we contribute to the common interest is through the state sales tax, right, Michael? I
Yes.
believe right now it's about 6.25%.
It is.
It had been 5 for many years.
Yes.
Because we had an emergency a few years ago, the state voted to go, and the governor signed to let it go to
Yeah.
6.25%. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think it should go back down to
Well,
5%?
not yet. I have nothing wrong in principle with our reducing it, but remember, I am a true conservative in the sense that my father was. I don't make changes radically, and I'm very suspicious of those who would create disruptive influences either to the right or the left. Reducing the taxes at a time when expenditures have already been radically reduced. Our aid to local education, Chelmsford, way down.
Okay.
Our maintenance of local roads and bridges, way down. Reducing tax collections right now, in the middle of a continuing recession, would imbalance that budget. We would begin to look like the feds, or even worse, maybe the state of California. So I want a balanced budget every year, and that does mean biting the bullet and being for decent tax revenues. Sandi believes that we should lower taxes, and I think that's an honest depiction of her position, but she doesn't spell out where her cuts would be. So it's easy to be for lowering taxes when you don't itemize where you would make cuts. I was hoping tonight would be a debate where Sandi and I would be before you together, and we could really talk honestly about the differences between us. I'm pro-choice for women. Sandi is anti-choice. I do believe in that gay folks, like everyone else, should have the right to marry. She's against gay marriage. I don't think people should have the right to carry concealed handguns in Massachusetts. The last time I checked, a 2006 questionnaire, Sandi is for people carrying concealed weapons in Massachusetts. So she's anti-choice for women. I'm pro-choice. She's anti-gay marriage. I'm pro-gay marriage. She's for carrying concealed weapons. I do think that's a mistake. We should be having because I respect her, she's a very smart person. I would like us to have an exchange of views on these social issues. Not just the fiscal ones, but on the social questions as well, so the people in Chelmsford realize, they get to ask, do I want to vote pro-choice for women, or do I want to repeal Roe v. Wade as Sandi favors? Those are
And I
important
hope
questions.
in the month of October you'll have a number of debates.
No,
right?
Sandi's vetoed them all. She
You're not having
refused to
any
debate.
debates?
The Western League of Women Voters asked us to debate. Sandi said no. The Concord Carlisle League of Women Voters invited us to debate. Sandi said no. Actually, you invited us to debate, and Sandi said no. So,
but I thought there were going to be some next month or something.
There's only two that I know of.
Right now there's 2, and we're working on a third.
Yeah.
Oh, that you are going to debate?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Well,
Oh,
there
so
should
there
be,
will
but
okay,
two. We've got 9 communities in the district. Sandi has said no to 3 of the 5 debates proposed. She said no to you. She said no to the Western League of. She issued a press release, I think, in which she said that the League of Women Voters was too far to the left to permit her to let more than one sponsor a debate.
I see,
So, I in all good conscience, I don't think I'm misquoting her. I don't think the League of Women Voters is a lefty organization. And I wish that, and maybe Sandi and I can still work this out, by the way. I'm not giving up.
Oh, yes.
I'm hopeful that she and I can sit down and we can say, look, the Chelmsford League, the Concord Carlisle League, the Western League, maybe the Bedford League of Women Voters. This is a good nonpartisan organization, and we should have multiple debates so that, because she's a beautiful articulator of a point of view. I think I can do a reasonable job presenting an alternative, and we should be doing it multiple times, not just twice.
So Sandi's here in the audience, just to let the people at home know. So we just asked Sandi. She said maybe 2, at least 2 debates, maybe 3.
We're trying to get a third.
Maybe trying to get a third. So at least you'll have some, Mike. And hopefully I'll be there that night. Or I'll definitely watch them on the internet, though, which everybody throughout the district, as you know, could watch this show. It's throughout the entire town. We get it on YouTube. I'll get it on the Patch in Concord, maybe the Waltham patch, if they have one, the Lexington patch. You know what I mean? The link. I did that after your state Senate debate
Yes,
on my show.
I appreciate it.
So, so we'll get a lot of people watching it.
Great.
But hopefully those other 2 or 3 debates you have, you could do the same thing. If you can get them on
If
the
we can
internet.
get cable to film.
Yes,
Yes.
and then if you can get it filmed.
Now, one of those 2 debates, the good news is it's with the Lowell Sun, so it's going to be in this part of the world. I don't think it's going to be televised by cable, though. It could be.
Oh, I hope
It
so.
could be, and I'm going to keep
Yeah.
my fingers crossed. But
I hope so, because I like to see them all.
I love them.
Yeah, I love
'em.
debates, yeah.
And I learn. I learn a lot
Oh,
from
yeah,
my
we do,
opponents.
yeah.
I learn a lot from the moderators.
Thank you. Well, there's a couple of ballot questions I'd like to ask you about, Michael. One of them, as you know, the medical marijuana ballot question. What do you think about that?
I favor it.
Okay.
I favor it. One interesting thing, I mean, I too have heard from folks who are suffering terribly and in acute pain. All they want is the option
Yes.
of using marijuana. It seems to work for folks in that situation.
Yeah.
This is a but that said, this would be pretty closely regulated. For example, the State Department of Public Health would keep a log of every patient in Massachusetts procuring marijuana and using it for medical purposes.
Yes.
So if a doctor started to abuse things
Yes.
by giving out marijuana left and right, that doctor would start to pop up on this log.
Yeah.
And which, by the way, which is made available to prosecutors,
Yes.
potentially.
Yeah.
And patients
Yeah.
who are overusing the privilege, possibly distributing it to others,
Yes.
would pop up on the log. In fact, there are very stiff penalties in this medical marijuana statute
Yeah.
for those who procure enough marijuana to start dealing it to others.
Yes. Yeah.
So we're making, the statute makes a good faith effort to balance the needs of people in pain
Yeah.
with those who would abuse the right.
Yes.
And I'll mention one other thing.
Yeah.
Anything passed on the ballot, like this medical marijuana statute, is a regular law, just like a law passed by the legislature, which means that it can be subject to hearings after the fact and changed.
Yes. Yeah.
So what
Or
I
repealed.
favor with respect to the medical marijuana law and with respect to the right to die,
Yes.
physician-assisted dying law, what I favor is putting both statutes before the legislatures for hearings,
Yeah.
bringing in the public,
Yeah.
bringing in experts, and are asking the question, did the drafters of these initiative petitions get it exactly right, or
Yeah.
do we need to further tighten up?
Yes.
Do we need to further liberalize, for that
Yes.
matter?
Yeah.
So this, whatever we enact isn't the final word. What the voters really need to decide this November is whether, in principle,
Yes.
they favor people with debilitating and very painful illnesses having an additional pain management option.
So even if that passes in November, it still has to go before the legislature.
It doesn't
as
have
you
to.
said.
I'm saying
That's
that
it.
we can,
Yeah.
if there's something about the stuff that's voted on in November that
Yeah.
isn't right,
Yeah.
that's too liberal
Yes.
or
You
too conservative,
Yeah.
the legislature can step in and change it,
Yeah.
and people can testify about it. So
Yeah.
the right of public access isn't ended.
Yes. Yes.
But I do believe in principle that people should have the right to use marijuana for medical uses.
Yes. How about the right to die, death with dignity? Do you believe people should have that right, or do you think
I do.
government should come in?
No. I do believe people should have that right, and I do want to gently correct two, or take issue with two statements of Sandi's in this respect. She is, again, a very articulate advocate against the right for physician-assisted dying, but she told a touching story. I was moved by it, about a friend of hers who's a quadriplegic, broke her back or broke her neck and can't move presumably below the neck even today, but who paints.
Yes.
That person couldn't use the right to die law that we're about to pass. I hope we're about to pass it in November, because it requires that someone be within 6 months of death. So while she told a wonderful story about someone who's discovered a zest for living despite being paralyzed, and more credit to Sandi for telling the story and for the woman down in the Cape for living that life, the truth is that the very conservative right to die under very narrow circumstances that we're passing wouldn't even have permitted that woman to consider killing herself, and to that extent, the entire story was a little misleading.
I see, yes, because you're saying they have to be within 6
They
months.
have
It
to.
has to be 2 physicians, right? I think,
And
or-
two physicians have to sign off, and by the
think-
way, it's not physicians killing people.
No,
That's
no,
the other,
right.
That's the
I
other
agree.
issue with which I'd take issue with Sandi. We're
No, I
not
know.
permitting a doctor to kill
No,
you.
right.
What we're doing is saying to a patient,
Yes.
you can procure from a doctor
Yes.
a liquid melody which you will take voluntarily if you wish,
Yes.
by yourself,
Yeah.
with one person present, I think.
Yes.
I'm not
Oh,
sure
yeah, at
about
least.
that. But it's not. The doctors are not the active players here.
Yes.
This is about patient choice in
Yes.
very narrow and very, very desperate
Yes.
circumstances.
Yes.
For example, if you had Lou Gehrig's disease,
Yes.
where the body wastes away slowly, and
Yes.
it's a terrible thing, you could
yes.
not use the statute we're about to vote on, because again, it's restricted to the last, so far as the physicians can tell, the last
Yeah,
6 months of
yeah.
life. So there are a lot of very painful circumstances were we even to pass this in November, where the law wouldn't come into play. It's a very conservatively written
Oh, yeah.
statute that creates a very limited right. I support it.
Yes, and we do, I think our Secretary of State sent out the pamphlet, right, with all the
Yeah.
information. I hope everybody reads this.
That's a very good point.
And
yeah.
you could read it about all 3 ballot questions, and I suggest that you do before you vote on November 6th.
That's a terrific idea.
Because I read through these, and I learned a lot about the question, all the safeguards in them. So
there are quite a few. I think we've benefited from medical marijuana laws written in other states, and by right of physician-assisted dying statutes in other states,
Oh, yes.
and we've learned from those examples, and I hope we've written a better instance of each.
Yep. Well, thank you, Michael. Well, we don't have all that much time. Time's flying by. But what are your thoughts about deposits on soda and juice bottles?
I'm for them, and again, Sandi and I disagree. I favor an expanded bottle bill. It's been extraordinarily successful, and I am a small business, as is Sandi, and a small business person. And I'll tell you, one thing I've noted in my hometown is that, in effect, sometimes government regulations create jobs. When we put a nickel deposit on a regular can of Coke, first of all, you could get the money back if you turned in your cans and recycled them, right?
Yes.
So it's not really a tax on you. You get all the money back
if you
recycle.
Yes.
But if you choose not to recycle and you put it out with the trash in a recycling bin, other people come along in my neighborhood and pick up those cans and turn them in at the grocery store and get the nickel. In fact, we created a recycling machine industry. You see those machines in every grocery store, right?
Yes.
Where people feed in the cans one at a time in order to get the cash. Sometimes government regulation not only protects the environment and not only avoids litter in Chelmsford, but it actually also creates business opportunities of its own. Not a bad set of trade-offs.
Yes. We might have a law, I think a bylaw in Chelmsford that doesn't allow people to go into their recycle bins, though, just to let you know. It may not
in
apply
Lexington,
in Chelmsford,
I can tell you they do it as a matter of course.
But also, we could recycle the bottles right in our recycling, and that's environmentally friendly,
Yes,
right?
it is.
Even if we don't have a deposit,
right.
I always recycle all my bottles for
Good for
juice
you.
and water. So, every 2 weeks
So
I
you get
come
my
to the
commendation.
All right. In fact, you got environmental legislature of the year.
I'm a former environmental legislator. I should mention, because I did serve in the Senate before, that I'm a former legislative of the year for the Environmental League of Massachusetts. I'm also a former legislative of the year by the Developmental Disabilities Council. I've worked a lot on issues involving physical and emotional and mental handicaps. That's one reason that I don't want to see taxes cut below our ability to sustain human services programs. I've worked a lot with disabled populations, and I don't want to see those legislative line items cut any further. And I'm also a former Mass Municipal Association legislative of the year. Key issue for Chelmsford. Local aid, especially aid to public schools. I fought to make sure that there was enough local aid for cities and towns in economic hard times like the present.
I see, yes.
And by the way, as long as we're on things that I support, I would support Jim Arciero's attempt to limit state public employee pensions.
Yes, on the form.
Absolutely.
And that's to keep it like below $100,000, maybe even less per year for all these retired
I think
state
it's
workers.
outrageous that a few folks cast the entire pension system into disrepute.
I agree.
By getting
Imagine
greedy
getting
and
a
grabby.
pension, $300,000 a year, or $200,000.
I think it's about $200,000, but let it be said that
No, I think Billy Bulger's getting over $300,000.
So I served in the state Senate, Carmen, with Bill Bulger, and I supported Bill Keating, and we ran a candidate against Mr. Bulger for Senate President.
Yes.
I felt that there was too much concentration of power in Bill Bulger's hands. And I do believe it's important to have independent voices in the legislature, but it doesn't have to be a Republican voice. It can be an independent Democrat who says, look, no midnight debates, no amendments past 2:30 in the morning, no concentration of power in the Senate leadership. Let's have a little internal democracy.
Oh, yes.
So there's more than one way to have independence, and I think a feisty independent Democrat can do the job.
Yes. And I think Billy Belcher's pension is about over $300,000 a year. The last I read.
I don't know.
And he's in retirement getting over $300,000.
I thought it was 190, but what do I know?
No,
I've lost
I
track.
remember
Yeah.
specifically because I used to bring it up in many of my shows with Jim Arcero and the other state reps.
Yeah. So I
But-
would favor imposing a ceiling.
A ceiling, yeah, great. So hopefully you could work with Jim on that,
That
or
would be good.
Sandy, or
Jim's a
whoever
great
gets
American.
elected.
I will
Yes.
work on it.
Yeah, Jim's a great guy, a good friend of mine, and so are all of our other three
Yeah,
state
you've got a
reps.
good delegation.
We do. We have fantastic state reps, I think.
I know Corey Atkins well. She's from.
Oh, yes, from Concord.
I
In
ran
fact,
into
she'll
her
be
in the
on our
last
show
campaign.
next week. I am having a debate with Corey Atkins and her Republican opponent.
He agreed to it?
Oh, yes, yeah, Michael
Well,
Bean.
I haven't talked to Sandi Martinez, who
Yeah.
won't agree to a debate before
Yeah,
you.
you could come on the show again.
I'd love
If
it.
If
Sandy
we could
and I
get
should come
Sandy to
back.
agree, I'd love it.
Why
I
did she say no?
I don't think she gave me a rationale, Michael. So, no, I don't think there was any rationale. It was all via email, so I don't have the rationale. I don't understand it either, because I think the more debate you have, the better it is. If you have the good message, get it out there as much as possible. And the debates tend to get more viewers than just a one-on-one conversation, in my experience, because debates are more interesting and exciting.
They're lively,
right?
yes.
So it would have been to her benefit, I think, to do it. And Sandy, if you're watching this, please let me know, and we could schedule another debate before the election with you and Michael if you would like to do it. Just let me know. Great. Michael, a couple of quick questions because our time is running out so quickly. You know, I talked with Sandy about union membership for daycare centers. What do you think about that?
So far as I know, and I would need to read the statute, but as you've described it on this show, I would have disagreed. I do not believe that mom and pop daycare centers should have to be a union shop in order to get a state voucher.
Yeah, I agree.
Now that said, I haven't read the statute, so I
Yeah.
want to reserve
the
my
final
rights
judgment,
in
yes.
terms of the fine print. But in
Right.
principle, that is overreaching. That
In
goes
fact,
too far.
Yeah, because the first question we had to do with jobs, right? One of the problems with creating jobs is sometimes you have too many government regulations which are unnecessary, and that burdens the small businesses, so you have less small businesses being created, right, Michael?
Well, I
And
do
it-
want to, but let me, the difficulty, and this is, we should have a drink or something, or maybe an ice cream sundae at Sully's and talk this one out. When people talk about overregulation, I'm a small business guy, and I talk to a lot of small business people, and they actually mention health care coverage for all or environmental regulations. Now, I happen to think letting everybody have health insurance, by and large, was a dramatic improvement in the Massachusetts scene, and I happen to be a strong environmentalist. So I am not in favor of a blanket statement that says that we overregulate if it's euphemism or code for saying roll back health insurance or roll back environmental regulation. And sometimes, as I say, when I talk to the small business guys who are more conservative than I am, what they're really kvetching about is the fact that they should have to pay the penalty if they have over 10 employees in lieu of insuring people if they don't want to give them health insurance. I happen to think that penalty, if your employment base is of a certain size, is legitimate, because I think everybody in the insurance pool, everybody putting in some money, helps us take care of those who truly become ill. And it's sort of all or nothing. We have to all be in that community pool together to make it work financially.
Well, you heard what Sandi Martinez said, how when she talks to the small business owners, they are very discouraged by having to insure new employees. They can't grow their employee base as much as they'd like because the health insurance is just so expensive.
Right, but it's only. But remember, the penalty they pay in lieu of insuring people is actually relatively modest.
Oh, it
I
is
think
right
it's
now. It's very small.
Yeah. So that is not the difference between their expanding jobs and not. And that does, by the way, doesn't make people move to New Hampshire either.
Okay.
The penalties in the insurance for all thing, the Massachusetts version of Obamacare, are fair, and you and I would agree, pretty modest. So what I find is that people come at these issues, and these small business guys with whom I disagree on this issue are friends of mine. And so we talk about this all the time. They're trying to make a point.
Yes.
It's not that really the penalties in the health care law are debilitating. They're trying to make the more general point that they fear government regulation. They don't want to have their hands tied in too many directions. As a general matter, I think government can overregulate, and I need to be careful about that.
Yes. Yes.
So my answer is, on healthcare, I don't think it's true, but I do watch for overregulation in other areas, and I'm sympathetic to the general point. We shouldn't have it. We shouldn't have regulations that are unnecessary.
Yes. In fact, is it possible that the legislators in the State House and the Senate and the reps, the state reps, could go through every regulation that we put on our businesses to kind of get rid of, every once in a while, just kind of get rid of the ones, even if it's a small piece of paperwork that a business has to fill out once. Yeah, just kind of clean sweep every once in a while.
Yes.
Because why burden our businesses? Because therefore they're less able to create new jobs, create new businesses. If it's a big hassle.
And I'd even go further, by the way. I like something that President Obama has done. He appointed this very smart guy named Cass Sunstein to a federal job, and Sunstein's purpose, function, was to apply cost-benefit analysis.
Yes.
If the cost of a regulation outweighs the benefit, that regulation should go away.
Yeah.
I think we need to bring rigorous cost-benefit ideas to state regulations, and when it doesn't compute, that regulation should go bye-bye.
Yes, I agree.
That's a good Obama principle.
But getting back a little bit to the tax question that we were talking about before, the income tax, the sales tax, as you probably know, on some of the economic theories, the idea is if we lower our taxes,
I know, I am
we might
familiar with
increase
supply-side economics.
revenues,
And I think it's
right.
dead wrong.
Okay.
I think
But
what the data showed, the data show is that by and large, supply-side economics fails. If you do lower tax rates, other than short-term effects, you don't gain it all back in terms of additional jobs created. So the long-term look, when Ronald Reagan left office, this country had a terrible federal deficit. He's the kind of Republican who wouldn't be acceptable by today's standards because he was actually quite liberal. He raised the payroll tax to save Medicare, right?
Raised a few
he
taxes,
raised taxes, but he spent so much on foreign wars that he still left Bill Clinton and George Bush, his successor, in a very bad deficit situation. So supply-side economics, by and large, doesn't compute, although it's a very elegant and nice idea. I wish it did.
Well, yes,
wish
I
less was
understand
more.
what you're saying, but I think there was a big increase in spending during the Reagan administration. You mentioned wars. I think there was a big defense buildup. We were trying to bankrupt the Soviet Union so that they tried to keep up with the United States, and then they eventually did.
Well, there are lots of historians who would differ with the accounts about why the Soviets fell.
Right.
A lot
one
of
of them is they felt that they were trying to keep up, with the
But unfortunately,
space
it left us with a bad deficit situation. But I'll give Reagan credit because I don't want to be one-sided about this. He was willing. He was fiscally conservative in the way that I am. He was willing to raise taxes to see whether he could, in the case of the payroll tax, put things on a solid financial footing. So there was a little bit of a Democrat in Ronald Reagan, to be honest with you. He wasn't just a low-tax guy like today's like Sandi is, I might add. He was to the left of Sandi. Sandi is way to the right, by the way, way to the right of Scott Brown. My honorable opponent for state senate is much more conservative than Scott Brown because she's anti-choice, anti-gay marriage, for all kinds, anti-gun control in every sense. But we should be debating this. I shouldn't be saying this by myself.
Right. And
let's get her back on the show.
Yes, right. But also to continue with this during the 80s and what happened with the Reagan administration, I believe when he took office, the income tax rate was somewhere in the neighborhood of 70%, and he helped get that down to 28% along with the legislature, right? He worked with Tip O'Neill.
So I would not be in favor of popping it back up to 70, but I like Obama's approach. I like Obama, in talking about the end of the Bush era tax cuts and this fiscal cliff that we're facing in early January. He would let that top rate on the 1% go up, but it would nowhere near again approach 70%.
No, it would only be like...
It's a good compromise.
I think during the 90s, what Bill Clinton had, it was about 39% the tax rate.
He brought it down.
Something like that. So that's all they're talking about, yes. Michael, so I can't believe it. Our time has run up. Do you have quickly a campaign party coming up? I asked
Well, I'll
Sandi
tell you,
about that.
what I would like is to